Loneliness. It's a word that feels like a bruise, a silence that echoes too loud. Most people don't talk about it until it's crushing them, until it becomes unbearable. We treat it like a disease, something to hide, something that means we're broken or unwanted. But what if loneliness isn't a flaw in you? What if it's a signal, a psychological whisper that something within is asking to be seen, to be heard, to be met? In the modern world, we're surrounded by people, but still feel deeply alone. That ache you carry isn't a failure. It's your soul knocking. It's not asking you to run from the silence, but to enter it, because within that stillness, there's something sacred waiting. Carl Jung believed that symptoms are messages from the unconscious. That means your loneliness might not be a problem to fix. It might be the most honest thing about your life right now. It's not just about missing someone, it's about missing yourself. And until you listen, the ache won't go away. But when you do, everything begins to change. We've been conditioned to believe that loneliness is a sign we've done something wrong, as if being alone means we're unlovable, unwanted, or unworthy. But this belief is rooted in a culture obsessed with external validation, where being constantly connected is seen as success, and solitude is equated with shame. The truth is, loneliness doesn't mean you failed. It's not evidence of your inadequacy. It's feedback, raw, emotional, and honest. It's your inner world saying something is off, something vital is missing. That feedback might be calling your attention to the absence of meaningful connection, or to the disconnection between your outer persona and your inner truth. Either way, it's not an indictment, it's an invitation. Loneliness emerges when the world outside stops matching the world inside. You may be surrounded by people, but if you can't be real with them, if you feel unseen, unheard, or unknown, the ache grows. This isn't a social flaw, it's a spiritual signal. It says you're craving authenticity, you're craving intimacy, you're craving yourself. Jung taught that wholeness isn't found in other people, it's found within, through the integration of what we've disowned. Loneliness is often the surface symptom of a deeper fragmentation. It's not saying you need to be rescued. It's saying you need to return to something inside that you've been avoiding. Think of loneliness like emotional hunger. When your body lacks nutrients, it signals you with cravings. When your soul lacks connection, real connection, it does the same. But instead of reaching inward, most of us numb the signal. We scroll, we binge, we stay busy. We surround ourselves with noise to drown out the call. But ignoring loneliness doesn't silence it. It amplifies it. Because it isn't punishing you. It's trying to wake you up. To show you the truth you've buried under habits and distractions. It's the start of something, not the end. There's a sacred shift that happens when you stop treating your loneliness as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a message to be decoded. It changes your posture from shame to curiosity. You begin asking different questions, not what's wrong with me, but what is my loneliness trying to show me? And suddenly, the ache transforms. It softens. It becomes a doorway, not a dead end. This is what Jung meant when he said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because sometimes loneliness is just the shadow of your unlived self asking to come home. When we say we feel lonely, what exactly are we missing? Most people assume the answer is simple: companionship, love, someone to talk to. But if you pause, if you truly sit with that emptiness instead of trying to fill it immediately, you begin to realize the void isn't just about the absence of others. It's the absence of something deeper, something internal. It's not that no one is around. It's that you no longer feel connected to yourself. There's a hollowness, like something essential has been lost. And you can't fix that kind of emptiness by simply being near people. because it's not a lack of contact, it's a lack of meaning, a lack of alignment between who you are on the inside and how you live on the outside. The inner void is your soul's way of telling you you've abandoned something sacred in yourself, and it's time to come back. Carl Jung spoke often about the self, not the ego, not the image you show the world, but the deep, total essence of who you are. And the tragedy for many people is that we've spent so long living from the surface, performing, adapting, pleasing, that we've lost contact with that core. The void we feel isn't just emotional, it's existential. We've become strangers to our own inner world. We don't know what we love anymore. We've forgotten what lights us up. And so we walk around with lives full of routines, responsibilities, and noise, but we're starving on the inside. We're overfed with stimulation, but undernourished in soul. Loneliness, in this sense, becomes not just a symptom, but a compass pointing back to the parts of ourselves we've buried under the pressure to be normal, liked, or successful. The truth is, most people aren't running from others, they're running from themselves. The silence of solitude doesn't scare them because they're bored. It scares them because it reveals too much. Without distractions, the questions start bubbling up. Who am I, really? What do I actually feel? Why do I keep avoiding what I know is true for me? And the answers to those questions often hurt. They reveal neglected dreams, suppressed pain, unresolved grief, unmet needs. That's why we fill the void with noise, relationships that aren't nourishing, work that burns us out, habits that numb. But Jung reminded us that what we resist persists. That void doesn't go away, it waits, because it doesn't want to punish you. It wants to reunite you with yourself. To face the inner void is an act of courage. It means sitting with discomfort without trying to escape. It means asking, gently but honestly, what part of me did I abandon in order to survive? It might be the part that was too wild for your family, too emotional for your culture, too creative for your job, too real for your social circle. Whatever it is, loneliness often signals that you've lost contact with an essential aspect of your being. And the beauty of this realization is that it gives you a path forward, not through chasing someone else to complete you, but by reconnecting with what was lost within. The void isn't empty. It's full of possibility. It holds the parts of you that are waiting to be seen, loved, and lived again. And the moment you begin that journey inward, loneliness shifts. It becomes less of an enemy and more of a teacher guiding you back to wholeness. From a young age, we're taught, subtly and sometimes directly, that being alone means being unwanted. The child sitting alone at lunch, pitied. The person without weekend plans, judged. Solitude is painted as the absence of value, as though our worth is determined by how many people want to be near us. This conditioning runs deep. It seeps into how we define success, happiness, even love. We start to believe that togetherness is the goal, no matter the quality of connection, and so we cling, not because we love fully, but because we fear being alone. But this fear wasn't born in us. It was taught. Through media, family dynamics, peer pressure, we were never shown the beauty of solitude, only its shadow. We were never told that sometimes the most sacred transformations happen when we're completely alone with ourselves, without noise, without performance, without masks. Carl Jung understood that solitude was not isolation, but a necessary container for individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are beneath conditioning. But society doesn't reward inner work. It rewards fitting in. So solitude, rather than being seen as a sacred space for self-reconnection, gets pathologized. If you're alone too often, people assume you're depressed, broken, or antisocial. Rarely do they ask if you're listening inward, if you're healing, if you're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. This fear of solitude keeps us in a kind of emotional captivity. We surround ourselves with people, not because they truly see us, but because they distract us from ourselves. We choose noise over truth, company over clarity, presence over depth, and yet there is a different kind of solitude, one that's not rooted in absence but in presence, the kind where you finally feel your own breath, your own body, your own thoughts, without interference. This is not the same as being lonely. It's being with yourself so fully that the silence becomes symphonic. But to reach that, we must unlearn the fear we were taught. We must realize that solitude is not evidence that we're unloved. It's the space where we learn to love ourselves. It's where the inner voice, long drowned out by the volume of other people's expectations, begins to speak again. And often that voice has been whispering for years. Come back, you've left me behind, let's come home. This is what solitude makes possible. Not exile, but return. It's time we stop framing solitude as something to be ashamed of. Time we stop treating time alone as a punishment rather than a portal. Jung said that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. And often what's most important is what we've never told ourselves, what we've ignored, denied, or forgotten. Solitude gives you the rare chance to face it all, to feel grief you never grieved, to remember dreams you silenced, to sit with your truth, unfiltered. This kind of solitude is not dangerous, it's medicinal, but only if we stop fearing it, only if we stop running. Because the fear we were taught about solitude, it was never about solitude. It was about what we might find when we finally sit still, ourselves. Most people don't begin the journey of self-awareness from a place of peace. They begin from pain. And loneliness is often the first crack in the illusion that everything's okay. It's the emotional silence after the noise fades. The moment when external distractions no longer satisfy the aching within. While many treat loneliness as an emergency, it's actually an awakening. It's the moment the ego loses its grip, when the roles you've played, the masks you've worn, the performances you've perfected no longer protect you from the truth inside. Carl Jung believed that true self-awareness could not begin without confrontation, without a descent into the uncomfortable, the dark, the unfamiliar. And loneliness, when fully felt, is just that. It confronts us with our unmet needs, our unresolved wounds, our forgotten selves. Not to punish, but to awaken. We tend to associate self-awareness with clarity, calm, even enlightenment. But in truth, its beginning is often chaos. The ego resists. The inner critic gets louder. The mind races to explain, to fix, to escape. And yet, if you stay with your loneliness, if you don't numb it, dismiss it, or blame it, you start to see through the illusions you've built. You notice how often your life has been lived for others. How rarely you've asked, what do I actually feel? It is in this raw space, this initial unraveling, that the real work begins. Because awareness doesn't arrive clean and polished. It arrives in fragments, like pieces of a self you've forgotten. And each moment of loneliness is like a candle in the dark, illuminating one more piece of the truth you need to reclaim. Many people ask, how do I become more self-aware? Expecting tools, techniques, perhaps meditation or journaling. But the real doorway is much simpler and much harder. It begins by staying present with the very emotions you've always tried to outrun. Loneliness is one of them, and not the romanticized kind, the aching, empty, restless kind. When you stay with that ache, you start to hear its voice. You begin to realize it's not just pain, it's information. It's the soul's way of alerting you. You've gone too far from home. It's like emotional GPS, guiding you inward, toward parts of you that have long been waiting. And this is the quiet miracle, when you realize your loneliness is not just about other people, it's about how deeply you've abandoned your own presence. And so, the first step to self-awareness isn't knowledge. It isn't theory, it's relationship. It's about turning toward your own discomfort, your own emptiness, with compassion instead of fear. In doing so, you become someone you can trust again. You stop needing others to validate your existence because you're finally witnessing yourself. This is the sacred potential of loneliness. It makes the unconscious conscious. It exposes the split between who you are and who you've pretended to be. It leads you out of the performance and into presence. And though it hurts, it's a holy kind of pain, the kind that doesn't destroy but reveals. And once you see, truly see, you can't go back to sleep. You begin walking a path that's not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. Loneliness, when faced with honesty and depth, becomes a mirror, one that doesn't just reflect the present moment, but every past wound you've quietly carried. Most of us don't feel lonely simply because we are alone in the room. We feel lonely because we are unconsciously reliving an old, unhealed moment. The time we cried and no one came, the moment we reached for love and were ignored, the countless instances where our true selves were rejected, shamed, or silenced. These wounds don't vanish with time. They bury themselves deep in the unconscious, shaping how we show up, who we trust, and how we love. Carl Jung knew that the psyche is not linear. It holds time in layers. So when loneliness strikes, it often peels back the layers of now and brings us face to face with the then. Wait, and if we dare to stay with that pain, we uncover the real cause of our emptiness, not lack of people, but lack of healing. These old wounds don't just cause sadness, they create survival strategies. We become pleasers, overachievers, avoidants, clowns, caretakers. Anything to avoid the terror of being unseen again. And so, the loneliness we feel as adults is rarely new. It's echoing from childhood. The psyche learned to protect itself by disconnecting, but this disconnection, over time, becomes a prison. We long for intimacy, but fear exposure. We crave love, but sabotage vulnerability. And this creates an endless loop. We isolate because we hurt, but the isolation deepens the hurt. When Jung spoke of healing the inner child, he wasn't speaking of nostalgia. He was speaking of the real psychological work required to break these patterns. And loneliness is often the only thing strong enough to crack the walls we've built. It hurts, yes, but in that pain, we're being invited to finally feel what we once had to suppress. In our culture, we're taught to fix feelings like loneliness with quick solutions, texts, social media, dating apps, busy schedules. But all of these are distractions. None of them reach the root. To truly heal from loneliness, we have to sit with it and ask, what part of me still believes I am unlovable? Because that's often what the loneliness is pointing to. Not a situational emptiness, but a self-perception formed long ago. Maybe your parents were emotionally unavailable. Maybe your needs were too big for the environment you were born into. Maybe you were praised only when you performed, not when you simply existed. These early experiences taught you something crucial, that being fully seen is dangerous. And so, you learned to hide. But here's the paradox. Healing happens only through being seen, and loneliness, as agonizing as it is, brings that truth to the surface. The wound needs to be witnessed, not avoided. When you let loneliness speak, you begin to hear your story in a way you never have before. You stop treating it as a flaw to be hidden and start seeing it as a messenger of the soul. You begin to realize that the ache is sacred. It carries your unmet needs, your unshed tears, your silenced voice. Jung believed that the path to wholeness involved integrating our wounded parts, not eliminating them. Loneliness is one of those parts. It is not a weakness to overcome, but a signal to follow. If you listen closely, it will show you the places where love never reached. It will guide you to memories you've buried, emotions you've labeled as too much, truths you've been too afraid to face. And in doing so, it opens a door, not to immediate relief, but to deep restoration. You cannot heal what you do not feel. And loneliness, painful as it may be, gives you the gift of feeling what was never allowed to be felt. That is where transformation begins. At the surface, we're a society obsessed with connection. We swipe, scroll, text, share, post. We go to parties, join groups, follow trends. On the outside, it seems like we're more connected than ever. But beneath that surface lies a deeper truth. Most of us are terrified of true intimacy. Because true intimacy requires something our defenses were built to avoid, being fully seen. Not the curated self, not the mask, not the role. The real self. The messy, wounded, complicated, vulnerable self. And that is terrifying. Carl Jung, who wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And if we can't even accept ourselves fully, how can we possibly let someone else see us without the armor? So we settle for contact without closeness. We chase connection, but we flee from the kind of depth that could actually touch our soul. Because to be touched at that level is to risk everything we've built to protect ourselves. Most of us have learned, consciously or not, that love is conditional. Maybe you were only praised when you were quiet, polite, or successful. Maybe you were punished or ridiculed when you expressed too much emotion. Over time, your psyche learns, to be loved, I must be edited, I must be good, I must be pleasing. And so we enter relationships with a filtered version of ourselves. We show only the parts we think are acceptable, desirable, safe. But deep down, something aches. Something in us knows that we are not truly being loved. Only the persona is. And that's where the loneliness sets in, even in the arms of another. Jung's concept of the persona becomes vital here. It's the mask we wear to survive social life. But it becomes a prison if we forget it's not who we truly are. True intimacy cannot exist when the persona is in control. It demands that we drop the act, and that for many is the hardest thing to do. Ironically, the very thing we fear, being fully seen, is also what we crave. We long for someone to look at us and say, I see you, all of you, and I still choose you. But that kind of love requires risk, vulnerability, honesty. It requires showing someone not just the beautiful parts, but the parts you hide even from yourself. And this is where loneliness becomes so insidious. We try to end it with connection, but we often do so without revealing our truth. So the loneliness stays because we're not really connecting. We're performing. We're role-playing, and we wonder why we feel empty afterward. Intimacy begins the moment we drop the performance, when we stop trying to be liked and start choosing to be known. And that can only happen when we're brave enough to risk rejection, when we realize that being loved for a lie is far lonelier than being rejected for the truth. True intimacy is not found in grand gestures or constant companionship. It's found in presence. In being with someone, or even with yourself, in the rawness of what is real. It's found in saying, this is who I am, and I'm not hiding anymore. And yet, to arrive there, we must dismantle decades of conditioning. We must face the parts of us that say, I'll be abandoned if I show this, or I'll be too much. These beliefs are not facts, they are scars, and loneliness brings them to the surface, not to shame you, but to invite healing. Jung believed that only by integrating the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've disowned, could we experience true wholeness. And this applies to love too. Until we bring our whole selves into relationship, we'll keep feeling alone, even in the most crowded room, even in the most loving embrace. Because connection without intimacy is just proximity. Intimacy is something else entirely. It is the courage to be fully human in front of another soul. We live in a world designed to help us escape ourselves. The moment an uncomfortable feeling arises, especially loneliness, we're handed an endless buffet of distractions: entertainment, notifications, food, substances, productivity, validation. Everything screams, "Don't feel that." Numb it, fix it, replace it. But here's the irony. The more we run from our loneliness, the more it grows. Why? Because loneliness isn't something to be erased. It's something to be understood. When we treat it like a problem, we miss its message. Carl Jung warned of this danger, that by avoiding the unconscious, we give it more power. When we suppress what wants to be felt, it doesn't disappear. It becomes shadow. It shows up in addiction, anxiety, depression, chronic busyness. And what we're really doing isn't escaping loneliness. We're feeding it. Each attempt to distract ourselves is like saying to the soul, "I'm not ready to hear you." And the soul, in return, grows quieter and sadder. The escape isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like overworking. Sometimes it's always being on, always being the helper, the achiever, the one who has it all together. These patterns are rarely questioned because society rewards them, but they're just as effective at suppressing loneliness as alcohol or scrolling through social media. The problem is, every time we escape, we reinforce a false belief: I am not safe alone with myself. That belief becomes the foundation of our inner world. And from there, intimacy becomes harder. Creativity dries up. We lose touch with our desires, our truth, even our identity. Jung believed that wholeness doesn't come from perfection. It comes from integration. But integration can't happen when we are perpetually distracted. The work is not in finding the perfect life hack to escape loneliness. The work is in turning toward it and asking, what have I been unwilling to feel? That question alone can break the cycle. There's a moment in every healing journey when the distractions stop working, the pleasure fades faster, the noise becomes irritating instead of comforting. That's when the truth begins to break through. You realize that the pain you've been avoiding is not your enemy. It's your oldest companion, and it's been trying to get your attention for years. Jung wrote that the soul often speaks in symptoms, in what we call dysfunction, and loneliness, when chronic, is not a failure. It's a symptom of deeper disconnection, from self, from meaning, from presence. Escaping it only masks the real need to reconnect. But that reconnection is not instant. It begins with discomfort, with silence, with the terrifying quiet that most people try to fill. But if you sit with it long enough, that silence begins to shift. It no longer feels like emptiness. It starts to feel like possibility. And that's when the soul whispers, "I'm still here. I've been here the whole time." To stop escaping loneliness is to choose truth over comfort. It's to walk away from the endless noise and into the sacred quiet where your real self is waiting. It's not easy. In fact, it can feel unbearable at first. But the unbearable feeling is not the loneliness. It's the detox. It's your psyche adjusting to presence, to being fully here, fully with yourself. Jung understood this kind of initiation. He knew that only by descending into the discomfort of our inner world could we rise into our full humanity. Escaping loneliness keeps you in the cycle of fear and fragmentation. Facing it, holding it with compassion, witnessing it without judgment, is how you begin to transform. You stop trying to fix the feeling, and instead you let it guide you. You realize it's not trying to harm you, it's trying to lead you home. And perhaps the most radical thing you can do in a world addicted to escape is to stay. Most people know how to be alone physically. They can spend a night without company, eat dinner solo, go for a walk without talking to anyone. But being alone isn't the same as being with yourself. One is circumstantial, the other is relational. And here's the truth. Many of us have no idea how to be in a relationship with ourselves. We've spent years curating a life that revolves around others, their opinions, needs, validations, judgments. So when the noise fades and we're left with only ourselves, we often feel like we're in the presence of a stranger. That's where the discomfort begins. Carl Jung believed that the inner world must be made conscious, otherwise it rules our lives from the shadows. Loneliness gives us that rare, painful opportunity to finally sit down with ourselves and ask, who am I without the audience? Do I like the person who shows up in the silence? These are not easy questions, but they're essential ones. Most of us were never taught how to relate to our inner world. Instead, we were conditioned to either ignore it or control it. Emotions that made others uncomfortable were labeled as bad. Desires that didn't align with expectations were dismissed. Parts of us were exiled in the name of fitting in. And so when we try to spend time with ourselves now, we often run into all the voices we've inherited: internal critics, unrealistic standards, buried shame. No wonder we avoid solitude. But learning to be with yourself is not about achieving or peace instantly. It's about becoming curious about the thoughts that arise, the feelings that linger, the memories that surface. Jung emphasized that healing doesn't come from judgment, but from conscious observation. So instead of fixing what you find inside, begin by witnessing it. Let your inner world know that, maybe for the first time, you're not here to shame or escape it. You're here to understand it. To like yourself is not the same as inflating your ego or forcing affirmations into your mind. True self-like, true inner companionship is built on honesty. It's built on saying, I see my flaws, my contradictions, my wounds, and I still choose to stay. That's radical, because most of us were taught love had conditions, and we internalized those conditions into how we treat ourselves. So when we try to be with ourselves in loneliness, what often rises first is self-rejection. The belief that I'm not enough, I'm broken, or I'm unworthy. But Jung knew that what we reject doesn't disappear. It becomes shadow. The parts of you that feel unlikable aren't asking to be fixed. They're asking to be held, to be seen with compassion. Liking yourself means integrating, not performing. It means recognizing the child in you that was never allowed to be fully human, and finally telling them, you're safe with me now. You don't need to hide anymore. As you spend more time with yourself, something profound begins to shift. The silence you once feared starts to feel like sanctuary. The stillness you resisted becomes sacred. You no longer seek constant distraction because you've made peace with your own presence. And from that peace comes power, not dominance, but authenticity. You walk through the world less desperate for approval, less afraid of rejection, because you've already accepted yourself where it matters most. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, required us to turn inward, to integrate the disowned parts of our psyche. Learning to be with yourself is not just self-care, it's initiation. It's the return to the inner home you forgot existed, and the more time you spend there, the more you realize loneliness was never the enemy. It was the threshold, the doorway to self. And once you cross it, you no longer feel alone, you feel real. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. And not just connection to others, but connection to self, to meaning, to soul. It's easy to see loneliness as a punishment, as proof that something's wrong with us. But what if it's not a sign of brokenness, but of sensitivity? What if the ache you feel is a signal that you were never meant to live on the surface of life, that your soul is asking you to go deeper? Jung wrote that only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And loneliness is a paradox. It is both a wound and an invitation, a grief and a gateway, a pain and a path. The gift it offers is not immediate. You can't unwrap it with distractions or speed through the discomfort. You have to sit with it, bleed with it, breathe through it. But if you do, if you truly allow yourself to descend, you may find that loneliness holds something sacred, the seed of your transformation. In Jungian psychology, descent precedes integration. Before we can become whole, we must descend into what we've avoided, our fears, our sorrows, our shadows. Loneliness is often the force that initiates that descent. When the distractions fade and the world stops applauding, we're forced to meet ourselves naked, without the costumes of achievement or identity. That moment, while devastating, is also where truth begins. You begin to see what truly matters, not what was taught to you, not what society glamorizes, but what you in your quietest essence long for. Maybe it's stillness, maybe it's real connection, maybe it's creativity or healing or meaning. These insights rarely emerge when life is loud. They require the stillness that loneliness offers. It's not that the pain is the gift. It's that the pain clears the space where the gift can finally be seen. Loneliness strips away illusions so that what's real can begin to rise. One of the hidden gifts of loneliness is that it teaches discernment. When you stop seeking people to fill a void, you begin to notice the difference between proximity and presence, between attention and intimacy, between noise and nourishment. You no longer settle for relationships that drain you or perform for approval that never satisfies. Jung believed that true healing often begins when the ego stops fighting and starts listening. In loneliness, that listening becomes possible. The noise of the world quiets just enough for you to hear the voice within, the one that was always there, buried beneath roles and routines. And sometimes that voice says things you didn't expect. I'm tired. I want something different. Or even, I don't want to pretend anymore. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of awakening. The kind of awakening that can only happen when you're willing to feel what you've spent your whole life avoiding. Eventually, something shifts. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like openness. The loneliness that once haunted you begins to hold you. You start to realize this space is not a void, it's a womb. Something new is being born in you. A deeper self, a truer voice, a wholer soul. And you couldn't have met it without first walking through the silence. That's the gift, not the end of loneliness, but what it reveals. Jung taught that the soul doesn't evolve through comfort, it evolves through confrontation. And loneliness, when embraced with awareness, becomes a sacred confrontation, a holy reckoning with everything false and forgotten within you. And the more you allow it to do its work, the more you become the kind of person who can be alone without being lonely. Because now you're no longer running, you're remembering. And in that remembrance, something long lost begins to return, the self you were always meant to be. Isolation often feels like a prison, a state where the self is fragmented and disconnected. Yet, paradoxically, it is precisely in these moments of isolation, when the outer noise ceases and the distractions fall away, that the inner journey begins. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to face the parts of ourselves we have neglected or denied. This journey is not linear or comfortable. It involves confronting shadows, accepting contradictions, and embracing complexity within. When we first encounter our isolation, it may feel like a void, an emptiness that threatens to consume us. But that void is not a black hole. It is a fertile ground, a canvas upon which the true self can be rediscovered and reassembled. Integration is the art of gathering these scattered fragments and weaving them into a coherent, authentic self. The path from isolation to integration is deeply transformative because it demands radical honesty. To become whole, we must acknowledge not only the light within us, but also the darkness we've long resisted, the fears, the insecurities, the unresolved pain. Jung believed that these shadow aspects are essential pieces of the psyche, not enemies to be vanquished, but parts to be embraced. Integration means sitting with discomfort, holding space for all parts of ourselves without judgment or rejection. It means no longer living as fragmented beings, split between our true nature and our masks, but stepping into a life of unity and coherence. This requires patience and courage because the process often stirs deep emotional turmoil. Yet it also opens the door to profound self-awareness, healing, and ultimately freedom. In moving from isolation to integration, loneliness shifts its meaning. No longer a sign of absence or failure, it becomes a signal of growth and awakening. The solitude once feared transforms into sacred space, a place where the soul can breathe and speak. Here, the ego relaxes its rigid grip, allowing the authentic self to emerge. Jung emphasized that individuation is not about becoming perfect or escaping pain, but about embracing the full spectrum of human experience. This wholeness allows us to engage with life more deeply and genuinely. We no longer seek external validation to fill inner emptiness because we've built a relationship with ourselves that is grounded in acceptance and compassion. Integration becomes a foundation for resilience, creativity, and meaningful connection with others. Ultimately, the journey from isolation to integration is a return home, not to a place, but to oneself. It is the soul's longing fulfilled, the reconciliation of all opposing forces within us. Jung's vision of wholeness invites us to transform loneliness from a curse into a catalyst, from fragmentation into unity. This transformation is not a final destination, but an ongoing dance, a lifelong commitment to self-discovery and growth. When we step into this process, we begin to live fully and authentically, no longer afraid of solitude or the silence within. Instead, we welcome it as a friend, a guide, and a mirror reflecting the deepest truth, that we are complete, just as we are. And in that completeness, loneliness ceases to be a void. It becomes the fertile ground for a life of depth, meaning, and profound connection. Throughout this journey, we've come to see the ego not as an enemy, but as a complex guardian, flawed yet essential. It is neither villain nor victim. It is a protector that shields us from overwhelming truths while sometimes blinding us to deeper realities. Carl Jung's insights reveal that the ego's desperate attempts to control, perfect, and defend are born from an instinct to preserve identity, to keep us safe in a world that often feels unpredictable and threatening. But true growth arises, not from fighting or rejecting the ego, but from understanding and integrating it. When we stop resisting and start listening, the ego becomes a wise ally, one that can hold space for vulnerability, acknowledge shadow aspects, and invite the soul's quieter voice to be heard. This transformation requires patience, compassion, and courage. It means allowing the ego to soften, relax, and trust that protection doesn't always require rigidity. As the ego learns to relax, the soul speaks. And it is in this sacred dialogue that healing, wholeness, and true selfhood emerge. The ego's role shifts from a fortress to a bridge, connecting our fragmented selves to a more profound, authentic existence. In this space, loneliness loses its sting. Isolation becomes invitation, and protection turns into liberation. You are not your ego, but neither can you fully be without it. Embracing this paradox is the key to the deepest freedom. It is the heart of Jungian individuation and the path to becoming who you were always meant to be.